Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, as transcribed and explained in wonderful detail by Swami J from the website swamij.com, read by James Purdy. Yoga Sutras 1.1 to 1.4. What is yoga? Being prepared to start, to sincerely begin the pursuit of self-realization, is a most significant step in life, when the highest goal of life is taken on as number one on your list of things to do. The first word of the Yoga Sutras is atha, which means now. This particular word for now implies a preparedness in arriving at this auspicious stage of desire and commitment towards self-realization, the highest goal of yoga. Definition of yoga. The first four sutras define yoga, with that definition being expanded upon in the other sutras. In a systematic process of meditation, you gradually move your attention inward through all the levels of your being, gaining mastery along the way. Eventually you come to rest in your true nature, which is beyond all of those levels. This action and realization of this center of consciousness is the meaning of yoga. Yoga is the mastery of the activities of the mind field, and then the seer rests in its true nature. Knowing what's left after setting aside the obstacles. There is a fundamental simplicity to the process of yoga that is outlined in the Yoga Sutras. While the process might appear very complicated when reading the Yoga Sutras, in many commentaries, the central theme is one of removing, transcending, or setting aside the obstacles, veils, or false identities. The many suggestions in the Yoga Sutras are the details or refinements of how to go about doing this. By being ever mindful of this core simplicity, it is much easier to systematically progress on the path of yoga. The true self shines through. Once the obstacles and false identities have been temporarily set aside, the true self, which has been there all along, naturally comes shining through. The rest of the time we are so entangled with our false identities that we literally do not see that this misidentification has happened. That's an important point. It is the reason that sometimes it is said that we are asleep and that we need to awaken. That awakening to the self is the meaning of yoga. Like a mirror, consciousness looks outward through the intellect, through the mind, and then through the senses and body. It sees reflection like a mirror. It sees reality, a world, a self-identity, which it falsely thinks to be me or mine. Through the forgetting power of avidya, or ignorance, pure consciousness says, I am this or that. This is not at all bad, for it gives the opportunity for the joy of awakening through a journey called yoga, returning to the wholeness that was never really divided in the first place. Yoga and the Sankhya philosophies. The process of realization through yoga rests on the discovery of pure consciousness, Purusha, as separated from all the many false identities, which are considered to be the evolutes of primal matter, Prakriti. These principles of Purusha and Prakriti are part of the philosophical system known as Sankhya. Yoga and Sankhya are two of the 6 systems of Indian philosophy. Here's a little diagram as well. Prakriti and its evolutes. Yoga is samadhi. Both ancient and modern sages, including Vyasa, the most noteworthy commentator on the Yoga Sutra, flatly declare that yoga is samadhi. the high state of perfected concentration or complete absorption of attention. That's an important point. Yoga means union, literally, to yoke from the root yuj, which means to join or to integrate. It means to bring together the aspect of ourselves that were never divided in the first place. It means to attain direct experience of the core of that pre-existing holistic being who we truly are at the deepest level, and that is attained through samadhi. The goal of yoga is yoga, period. Yoga is not merely physical fitness, stress management, medical treatment, or a means of manifesting money, although authentic yoga is definitely beneficial in many aspects of the life. The goal of yoga is yoga, period. Here's an article there. You can see modern yoga versus traditional yoga. Introduction article. It is useful to read the introduction to the Yoga Sutras page, which describes several approaches to exploring the Yoga Sutra pages of this website. Self-realization in the microchip. There are three basic parts in relation to a microchip. Number 1, the stuff of which the chip is made of. Number 2, the program and the memory that operates the chip. And number 3, the electricity that allows the chip to operate. There are also three basic parts in relation to a human being. Number 1, the stuff. The basic stuff, prakriti, out of which all of the subsequent levels of our being are constructed or manifested. 2, manifestations. The outward manifestations of that basic stuff, like the program and memory in the microchip, including individuality, intelligence, mind, senses, and the building blocks of earth, water, fire, air, space, along with countless combinations and permutations of all of these. 3, consciousness. The pure, untainted, eternal consciousness, purusha, which flows through the entire matrix of activity of action, speech, and thought, like the unadulterated electricity that flows through the microchip. Experiencing the self. Self-realization is the state of knowing ourselves as the electricity. The pure consciousness that allows all the surface levels of our being to operate. There is no I as a composite of personality, program, or memory, which is itself attaining or gaining something new. Rather, it is the realization of that core self, which is beyond all those countless false identities, as unique and beautiful as those may be. Yoga Sutra 1.1. Now, after having done prior preparations through life and other practices, the study and practices of yoga begins. Yoga comes after preparation. This introductory sutra suggests that after our many actions in life and whatever preparatory practices we might have performed now, we are finally ready to pursue the depths of self-exploration, the journey directly to the center of consciousness, Atman, or self, our eternal and true identity. Discipline and learning. To practice yoga requires cultivating discipline and following a systematic method of learning, anunashanam, as it is said in Sanskrit. This has more to do with the quality or conviction in one's practices than it has to do with the quantity. This is described in greater details in the sutras 1.21 and 1.22. 5 states of mind. In describing the sutra, the sage Vyasa names 5 states of mind, of which the one-pointed, ekagra, state of mind is the desired state of mind for the practice of yoga. These 5 states of mind range from the severely troubled mind to the completely mastered mind. These 5 are also described in the 5 states section of the witnessing article. So we've got Kashipta, which is disturbed, Muda, dull, vikshipta, distracted, ekagra, one-pointed, nirodha, mastered. To position the 5 states of mind on the fingers is a good way of learning to remember them. Nirodha is the best one, mastered, controlling the mind field. Know where you are. It's very useful to be aware of these stages, both in the moment and as a general day-to-day level at which one is functioning. It reveals the depth of practice that one might be able to currently practice. Some aspect of yoga meditation applies to every human being, though we need to be mindful of which is most fitting and effective for a person with this or that state of mind. 2 of the states of mind are desirable. Of the 5 states of mind described below in more detail, the later 2, one-pointed and mastered, are most desirable for the deeper practices of yoga meditation. For most people, our minds are usually in one of the first 3 stages, disturbed, dull, or distracted. To deal with the troubled mind and the lethargic mind is process, leading one to a merely distracted mind. Form, from where one can more easily work on training the mind in one-pointedness. Stabilize the mind in one-pointedness. By knowing this, we can deal with our mind so as to gradually stabilize the mind in the 4th state, the state of one-pointedness. Note that this use of the phrase 4th state is different from that used in relation to the 4th state of Turuya. This is the state of mind which prepares us for the 5th state, in which there is a mastery of the mind. The first 2 states might also be dominant or intense enough that they manifest as what psychologists call mental illness. So, yoga is a marvelous system of psychology. And if you've ever suffered from any mental issues, complexes, it's great to practice yoga. That's just a side note. By reader. By the way, I'm James, and I've got a degree in psychology. Knowing where your mind is now tells you how to get where you're going. Number 1, the Kshipta disturbed stage. The Kshipta mind is disturbed, restless, troubled, wandering. This is the least desirable of the states of mind in which the mind is troubled. It might be severely disturbed, moderately disturbed, or mildly disturbed. It might be worried, troubled, or chaotic. It is not merely a distracted mind, but has the additional features of a more intense negative emotional involvement. Number 2, muda or dull. The muda mind is stupefied, dull, heavy, forgetful. With this state of mind, there is less of a running here and there of the thought process. It is a dull or sleepy state, somewhat like one experiences when depressed, though we are not intending to mean only clinical depression. It is that heavy frame of mind we can get into when we want to do nothing, to be lethargic, to be a couch potato. The muda mind is barely beyond the Kshipta disturbed mind, only in that the active disturbance has settled down, and the mind might be somewhat more easily trained from this practice. Gradually, the mind can be taught to be a little bit steady in a positive way, only occasionally distracted, which is the Vikshipta state. Then the mind can move on in training to the Ekagra and the Nirodha states. 3. Vikshipta, distracted. The Vikshipta mind is distracted, occasionally steady or focused. This is the state of mind often reported by students of meditation when they are wide awake and alert. Neither noticeably disturbed nor dull and lethargic, yet in the state of mind one's attention is easily drawn here and there. This is the monkey mind or noisy mind that people often talk about as its disturbing meditation. The mind can concentrate for short periods of time and is then distracted into some attraction or aversion. Then the mind is brought back, only to again be distracted. The Vikshipta mind in daily life can concentrate on this or that project, though it might wander here and there, or be pulled off course by some other person or outside influence, or by a rising memory. This vikshipta mind is the stance one wants to attain through the foundation yoga practices, so that one can then pursue the one-pointedness of ekagra in the mastery that comes with the state of nirodha. Number 5, ekagra one-pointedness. One-pointed. The ekagra mind is one-pointed, focused, concentrated. Yoga Sutra 1.32. When the mind has attained the ability to be one-pointed, the real practice of yoga meditation begins. It means that one can focus on tasks at hand in daily life, practice karma yoga, the yoga of action, by being mindful of the mental process and consciously serving others. When the mind is one-pointed, other internal external activities are simply not a distraction. The ability to focus attention is primary skill for meditation and samadhi. The person with one-pointed mind, just carries on with the matters at hand, undisturbed, unaffected, and uninvolved with those other stimuli. It is important to note that this is meant in a positive way, not the negative way of not attending to other people or other internal priorities. The one-pointed mind is fully present in the moment and able to attend to people, thoughts, and emotions at will. The one-pointed mind is able to do practices of concentration and meditation, leading one onward towards samadhi. The ability to focus attention is a primary skill that the student wants to develop for meditation and samadhi. Number 5, nirodha, mastered state. The nirodha mind is highly mastered, controlled, regulated, restrained. Yoga Sutra 1.2. It is very difficult for one to capture the meaning of the nirodha state of mind by reading written descriptions. The real understanding of this state of mind comes only through the practices of meditation and contemplation. When the word nirodha is translated as controlled, regulated, or restrained, it can easily be misunderstood to mean suppression of thoughts and emotions. To suppress thoughts and emotions is not healthy, and this is not what is meant here. Rather, it has to do with that natural process when the mind is one-pointed and becomes progressively more still as meditation deepens. It is not that the thought patterns are not there or are suppressed, but that attention moves inward or beyond the stream of inner impressions. In that deep stillness, there is a mastery over the process of mind. It is that mastery that is meant by nirodha. In the second sutra of the Yoga Sutras, the sutra below, yoga is defined as yogash chitta vritti nirodha, which is roughly translated as yoga is the control of the thought patterns of the mind field. Thus, this nirodha state of mind is the goal and definition of yoga. It is the doorway by which we go beyond the mind. All right, transitions, new years and new moments in life and meditation. The transition from one year to the next year happens in an infinitely short moment that is actually non-existent in time. So too, there are transitions in the moments of life and the moments of meditation. Mindfulness of transitions in daily life and during meditation time is extremely useful on the spiritual journey to enlightenment. The recording ends with a 15-minute guided contemplative meditation on the transitions. There's a little listening item you can listen to on this website if you like. Now there's also a lovely article or a lovely diagram entitled The Practical Journey Through the Yoga Sutras. I love this little diagram because it gives a beautiful overview of these Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and there's many clickable parts, and it's the most brilliant system of yoga and psychology that I've ever seen. And so you can press pause on your video and take a look at it, go to the website, and click any of the parts if you like. But I will continue on reading. Okay. There's also a video you can click onto here on the website. Okay, 1.2. Yoga is the control, nirodha, regulating, channeling, mastery, integration, coordinating, stilling, quieting, setting aside of the modifications, gross and subtle thought patterns of the mind field. Yogash chitta vritti nirodha. And there's definitions of the Sanskrit words here. Nirodha suggests self-training. The single sentence is a most succinct definition of the science of self-realization or yoga. The key to understanding the word nirodha, which defies translation or description. When translated poorly or misunderstood, it can sound like the suppression or repression of thoughts and emotions, which is definitely not what yoga is about. Rather, it has to do with a process more like coordinating and setting aside what is not significant or not self. It means not your true self, right? It means finding the jewel of truth that is underneath or behind all of the other activities in the mind field. This comes through a self-training program dealing with the relationships, senses, body, breath, and mind. Ultimately, the meaning of nirodha, and thus of yoga itself, begins to emerge experientially through doing the practices. Nirodha is the most desired of 5 states of mind. The sage Vyasa names 5 states of mind, of which the nirodha state of mind is the desired state of mind for the realization of the true self. These 5 states of mind are described just above in the discussion of Sutra 1.1. It's extremely useful to be mindful of the 5 states of mind so as to better understand their relationship to this most desired state of mind. Uncoloring your thoughts. To find the jewel of the self requires getting past the color of thought patterns, the coloring of thought patterns, such as attachment, aversion, and fear. This involves witnessing your own inner process. These are some big ideas here. Practice and non-attachment. 2 principles remain at the core throughout this self-training program. Number 1, practices leading to stability and tranquility. And number 2, non-attachment. There are many wonderful little diagrams on this website and in this description that you can take a look at on the actual web page. But let's continue reading. Attitudes, efforts, and commitments. 5 attitudes, efforts, and commitments are cultivated. Faith in your direction, energy to go there, mindfulness, and memory to stay there, and the ongoing commitment to seek the higher states of concentration and wisdom. Stabilizing and clearing the mind. Preparatory practices including meditation on attitudes towards people and ways to focus attention are done to train the mind so that the subtler meditations can be practiced. See Sutras 1.33 to 1.39. Reducing the gross colorings of mind. The more gross colorings of mind, dealing mostly with the attractions, aversions, and fears, are reduced through a process of training the senses, inner study, and surrender. Sutras 2.1 to 2.9. Discriminating through 8 rungs. Cultivating inner discrimination through the 8 rungs of yoga, so as to systematically uncover the jewel of the self. Sutras 2.26 to 2.29. The mind becomes like a transparent crystal. Here's another beautiful, beautiful diagram to take a look at. When the mind is clouded, it cannot clearly see the objects in the mind field or the objects of the world. It is like a clouded crystal or a stone that is of solid coloring. As the mind becomes clear through the meditation practices of yoga, that mind becomes like a transparent crystal. A transparent crystal will take on the colorings of any object it comes near. See Yoga Sutras 1.41 to 1.43. When such a clear mind focuses on an object in the mind field, it becomes totally absorbed in that object. allowing you to see the nature of that object very clearly. You systematically explore, encounter, examine, and gradually set aside with non-attachment the many false identities, attractions, aversions, and fears. This introspection is done not only at the grosser level of mind, but also at the subtler level, which is the storehouse of deep impressions, samskaras, and that drive karma. See Sutras 1.2 to 1.4 and 2.1 to 2.25. So you can really see the way the mind is altered by these things in the mind field. The mind is like a pure crystal, says the metaphor. The transparent crystal-like mind can eventually transcend absorption of all objects of the mind, leaving behind even the levels of samadhi on objects. The mind turns inward and surrenders itself into the direct experience of that which is beyond the mind. Awesome. An awesome thought for meditation. Now there's a little video here, The Seer Beyond the Mind Meditation by Swami J. And you're encouraged to check out this actual web page and view that video. 1.3. Sutra 1.3, that is. Then the seer abides in itself, resting in its own true nature, which is called self-realization. Then the self stands alone. As a result of having done the process of Nirodha, described in the last sutra, the true self stands alone, unencumbered by our many false identities, described in the next sutra. This standing alone process is why the phrase self-realization uses the word realization, rather than a word like attainment. The process is not one of attaining something we do not have, but rather is the one of removing the clouds so as to see the light that is already there. Beautiful metaphor here. The wave forgets the truth that it is the ocean, thinking itself to be the grand shape which it has temporarily taken. For a while it takes on the rupa, form of the wave. Finally it remembers its true rupa, form of the ocean. Yeah, the two coexist, though one is true and the other, though beautiful, is only relatively true. So too we humans forget our true nature, but through yoga can remember. Beautiful metaphor. Awareness remains unchanged. In deep meditation, you come to see that while the thought patterns shift here and there, ever changing their shape, the way that the waves on the ocean keep shifting, the awareness itself never changes. There is a constant, ever-flowing, ever-being awareness that simply is, that observes or witnesses. In meditation, this same truth is realized over and over, as layer after layer, level after level of mental process is revealed, and it's seen to be like the deeper shifting of the ocean waves. The awareness itself remains unchanged, and will become clear and clear as the center of consciousness that stands alone, though part of all levels it permeates. The seer. The word drastu means seer or witness. The word seer does not give you a theological or metaphysical description or definition of who you are. This is one of the beautiful qualities of yoga and the Yoga Sutras. There is nothing in the word seer to believe or not to believe. By saying that the seer rests in its true nature, after transcending the many forms of thought patterns in the mind field, one can simply do the purifying practices and personally experience the results. In English translations, the word drastu is often given meanings such as self, soul, or atman, such as in the translations above. This provides some clarity or speculation of the nature of the seer, but it is useful to remember that Patanjali is not actually telling you what is the nature of your true self, but that the seer will be experienced in itself, in its true nature, whatever or however that is ultimately experienced and described by each person. Experiencing the seer in its own true nature. Similarly, the word svarupe means in its own nature. Here also Patanjali is not giving a definition of your true nature. Once again, there is nothing to believe or not to believe. Through practice and non-attachment and transcending the many mistaken identities, you come to the direct experience of your own nature. Yet most of us are curious and want to hear or read about the descriptions of this true nature, leading us to speak of and to describe self, soul, or Atman, etc. While we use, describe, and discuss these terms, it is, again, most useful to keep in mind that yoga actually refers to it simply as the seer, which is resting in its true nature, allowing direct experience to reveal that or what this is. Okay, so there's some lovely articles on Bindu, pinnacle of yoga, Vedanta, and Tantra. You can check it if you want. And here's an excellent diagram. Consciousness withdraws from a series of instruments. When we speak of the stages of meditation, it can appear that I am a discrete traveler, that I am traveling from one location to the next, like stepping from one stone to another when crossing a stream. This is not actually how meditation works. Consciousness has progressively moved outward through a series of instruments, like telescopes, so as to experience the external world. The journey of meditation reverses this process by systematically withdrawing attention from those telescope-like instruments, allowing attention to rest in its pure, formless form, its true nature. Senses are instruments that bring experience inward to the mind. Mind is an instrument that brings experiences inward to the intelligence. Intelligence is an instrument that brings experience to the individual. Individuality allows consciousness to experience itself as an experiencer. So looking at this diagram, part 1, the seer is engaged with the world through the instruments. Looking at Mount Everest, it looks like. Number 2, senses are then withdrawn from the objects. Number 3, the mind is then withdrawn from the senses. Intelligence is then withdrawn from the mind. Individuality withdrawn from intelligence, now standing alone. Individuality surrenders into consciousness as the seer knows its true nature. Excellent diagram. Purusha and Prakriti. The process of realization through yoga rests on the discovery of pure consciousness, Purusha, as separate from all the many false identities, which are considered to be evolutes of primal matter, Prakriti. These principles of Purusha and Prakriti are part of the philosophical system known as the Sankhya. Yoga and Sankhya are 2 of the 6 systems of Indian philosophy. Discriminating between Purusha and Prakriti, the entire process of yoga rests on the discriminating between Purusha and the false identities of Prakriti. While this process of discriminating permeates the whole of the Yoga Sutras, the following 3 clusters of sutras will clarify the way discrimination relates to practices and realizations. And those 3 clusters are the 8 rungs in discrimination from sutras 2.26 to 2.29, the higher discrimination from 3.53 to 3.56, and Buddhi and liberation from sutras 4.22 to 4.26. All right, now we have 2 lovely little diagrams to take a look at, so pause if you're listening on video and take a look at these. Otherwise, we'll just keep on going. Sutras 1.4. At other times, when one is not in self-realization, the seer appears to take on the form of the modifications of the mind field, taking on the identity of those thought patterns. When we are not aware of our true nature, when activity of all levels of mind have been transcended, we experience pure consciousness. However, the rest of the time, mind flows towards the many sensory experiences we have, as well as towards the streams of memories and fantasies. The existence of the external world and the memories is not the problem. Rather, the pure consciousness mistakenly takes on the identity of those thought patterns. In this way, we incorrectly come to think that who we are is one and the same with these thoughts. The solution is to separate the seer and the seen, the experiencer and the object experienced. And this is the theme and practice of yoga. Okay, here's another wonderful diagram entitled Chocolate Bars and Yoga Sutras 1.2 to 1.4. Yoga is the control, nirodha, regulation, channeling, mastery, integration, coordinating, stilling, quieting, setting aside of the modifications, gross and subtle thought patterns of the mind field 1.2. Then the seer abides in itself, resting in its own true nature, which is called self-realization. At other times, when one is not in self-realization, the seer appears to take on the form of the modifications of the mind field, taking on the identity of those thought patterns, Sutra 1.4. Take formless melted chocolate. You get a chocolate candy bar mold. Pour and cool the chocolate. You get shaped chocolate bars. Now, even though the chocolate bar now appears to be in particular individual shapes, it remains nothing other than the chocolate that it was all along. Similarly, consciousness is also formless, like the hot chocolate. Memories or sensed objects are stored in the mind. Consciousness wraps around those objects. We mistakenly think these objects are who I am. Yoga Sutras 1.2 to 1.3. When we see clearly, we rest in our true nature of pure consciousness. We remember ourself in direct experience. Yoga Sutra 1.4. Without that clarity, we take on the false identities of the impressions of the mind field. We forget and think these are who I am. Excellent metaphors, I must say. Initially, this process of seeing clearly might relate to gross objects, such as what we all conventionally think of as memory. However, we gradually come to see that we have also become falsely identified with the subtler instruments with which we are able to experience, such as the instruments of cognition, the senses, or subtle building blocks of self-identity like earth, water, fire, air, and space, as well as the subtle energy flows. These are further described in later sutras, such as those in chapter 3. Consciousness wraps around mental objects. When a metal sculptor wants to make a mold, he might first make a plaster statue, then form the clay mold around that statue. Later, that clay becomes the mold for pouring the liquid metal. The process of the clay taking the form of the original plaster model is the meaning of the seer, or self appearing to take on the form of the thought pattern stored in the mind field. When pure consciousness wraps itself around the mental object it encounters, it only appears to take on the identity of that object. It is a sort of mistaken identity that results. Gold and clay. Gold is melted, reformed, and fashioned into many different ornaments, yet it remains gold. Clay is pushed and pulled and twisted and shaped into many different bowls or other objects, yet it remains clay. However, much consciousness shapes itself in the many objects stored in the mind field. That consciousness remains pure, standing alone. That consciousness itself, lacking any form, is described as having the nature of existence, consciousness, and bliss. It is always a mental object. The object around which consciousness wraps itself is always an inner mental object. Even though there may be an external object being perceived through the senses, indiras. If you see and smell your favorite food or most offensive object, it is the memory of that experience, the mental object that is being triggered and brought to the surface. Even if you've never experienced this particular object before, it is presented through the eyes and nose and other senses to the mind field, as if on a movie screen, which the seer can then watch. The experience itself is between the inner witness and the presented object, and that presented object might come either through the senses or memory, or subtle realm, internal awareness. The significance of this is that we need to work with our inner awareness in relation to the mental objects. In other words, we need to train our own mind and senses. 5 forms of mental objects. The 5 types of thought patterns that result from this false identity, of the seer taking on false identities, that is, are described in Sutras 1.5 to 1.11. How to realize consciousness from these few categories of mistaken identities is the process of enlightenment and the subject of Yoga Sutra, of the Yoga Sutras. This also greatly reminds one of the famous allegory of the cave by Plato, which you can search up on the internet. To close this first section, we've got another lovely diagram entitled "Change Your Inner Dialogue from I Want to It Wants." When likes or dislikes arise from the lake of the mind, we may say or think words like, "I want this or that," or "I don't like this or that." However, it is not the I who wants this or that, it is the it that wants this or that. It is the individual thought pattern itself, the deep impression or habit pattern in the mind field, which desires to fulfill its attraction or aversion. The lake of the mind, citta, thought patterns. Vrittis are like the waves or the whirlpools in the lake of the mind called citta. Some of the vrittis are colored with attraction or attachment. Some of the vrittis are colored with dislike or aversion. Some of the vrittis are neutral, not colored, and are just memories. Yoga explains that the reason for not experiencing the state of self-realization is that pure consciousness identifies itself with the deep thought patterns, vrittis, of the mind field, citta. See Yoga Sutras 1.2 to 1.4. The problem is that I identifies with all the vrittis, thought patterns, and each of them is an it that is not really who I am. It sounds like Alice in Wonderland somewhat. To see that it is the vrittis, not I, that are colored with attraction, aversion, and fear is a crucial step in the path of self-realization. One of the easiest, most straightforward ways to begin to correct this misunderstanding is stop saying I want, start saying it wants. We are definitely responsible for those many individual thoughts and their resulting speech and actions. But those thoughts are not who I am. As meditation progresses, the colorings of attractions and aversions gradually weaken as the real I, the true self, more clearly shines through. All right, I hope you enjoyed the wonderful interpretation of these Yoga Sutras, and hopefully we'll see you in the next section.